So let's get started. We are in the middle of Samson, and we left off last week in chapter 15, verse 9. And just to remind you what we did so far, we talked about the first woman, the first Philistine. There are going to be a total of 3 Philistine women that Samson is involved with in one way or another. So we did the first one, who he actually married, how he uses an event that happens with him with the lion and the honey to trap some of these Philistine guys. He kills them, then they kill his wife, then he kills them, a lot of back and forth. But what we see out of this whole thing is that the Philistines, first of all, are a very violent people. And they also are, Samson himself, what we begin to understand from this first story is that he is looking to become, to kind of worm his way in to Philistine society, to kind of come into them, and through being involved with them, having access to them, on a supposedly innocent way, he will be able to strike a blow at them. And that is certainly what we see in the incident with this first woman. I have mentioned before, but I want to focus on just kind of repeat this, who these Philistines are. These Philistines are people who are originally from the Greek islands. They are essentially mercenaries. They are people that, as a result of various wars, get thrown out of places where they had originally been, and they end up coming into Israel, invading, so to speak, from the west, and coming in, and they basically take over. I'm going to try to share a screen now. If this map, can you all see the map? Okay, I hope that's it. Yes. Okay, I can't see both.
I can see it.
Okay, good. All right. So they're coming in here from the Mediterranean. You know, they think, and I think we have this also in the Bible, this idea that they came from Kaftor, which is thought to be Crete. But whatever, be that as it may, is one of these Greek islands. It's out here in the Mediterranean, and they're coming in here. And they're coming, we see these are cities that we know from the Bible are Philistine cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gat, which is over here, and Ekron, which is over here. These are the 5 Philistine cities, okay, and they're in this area. Now, Samson is from the tribe of Dan, and he is described as being between Eshtaol and Sorah, which is, if you see right here, the city of Beit Shemesh. This is the area where Beit Shemesh is today. That is the area that Samson is from. So you can see that is at the edge of Dan as it borders Judah. Okay, this is where he's from. This western area of the country is now mountain range. As you move further east, and you can kind of see this on this map, you become in the mountain range. And that's also something important to understand as we see the encounters that we're going to read about next in this chapter. Okay, but when we want to understand what the Philistines were, the Philistines are people who are sophisticated. They are experienced soldiers. They have weapons and all kinds of tools from metal that are far more sophisticated than what the Israelites have, more sophisticated what the Canaanites have, because at the beginning of the book of Judges, we learned that some of these areas here in the valley up here, plus along the coast, are full of Canaanites. All of a sudden, with Samson, we discovered that there are Philistines in all of this area. And if we recall, I'm jumping ahead, but in the book of Samuel, when we meet Saul himself is going to war against the Philistines, and he's going to war all over here against the Philistines. And actually, Saul is actually killed by the Philistines here in the area of Beit Shan, which is way up north, very close to the Galilee. So that just gives you an understanding of how how widespread Philistines are. The Philistines are a completely different kind of enemy than we have seen until now. Until now, we've seen, even with Gideon, where they suffered terribly. Okay, but the Midianites come in, and they're focusing in a particular place, and then they are able to defeat the Midianites in battle. Okay. In the case of the Philistines, we are seeing that there's absolutely no attempt to go to battle. There is no attempt here to raise an army. And a lot of what I'm saying, by the way, are things that I have heard from my teacher, Rabbi Samet, and others that I've read. I'm just kind of putting it all together. But there is this understanding that the Philistines were so sophisticated militarily and had managed to conquer or at least extend their influence over so much of the land of Israel that it didn't seem to be a possibility for the Israelites to raise an army and fight against them frontally. They would lose. They didn't have the right equipment, and they did not have the military know-how to come up against them frontally. Now, this also tells us a lot about what Samson's goal is, but it also reminds me of something else. We learn in Joshua, for example, when Joshua talks about the parts of the land that were conquered by the Israelites and those parts of the land that were not yet conquered. And there's, I'm just thinking about it now, so I didn't have time to, I'm not going to go look it up, but if you want to know exactly where it is, send me an email and I'll send you the exact source. But there is a place where Joshua talks about how they conquered the mountaintops, but they didn't conquer the valleys. And this is in this area, Manasseh and Ephraim, in the area of Samaria. They didn't conquer the valleys. Why? And it says that because the Canaanites have metal chariots. Okay. So what does that mean? The Israelites who don't have metal chariots are only able to control the areas where they, as let's say, a more guerrilla type army or a more tree-based army would have the advantage, which would be in the mountains. If they're fast runners, if they can hide, if they can come up with all kinds of, secret, combat kind of maneuvers, the kind of things you would see as special forces. Okay, the mountains will be their strategic advantage. On the other hand, in the valleys, if you're not going to have chariots, you're going to be at a tremendous disadvantage. And that, by the way, is what we see in the battle of Deborah and Barak against Sisera. Sisera has the chariots. Barak comes down from the mountains. He's coming down from Mount Tabor and from further north, the mountains of Naphtali. This is where they're secure. But if he's going to have to, confront Sisera's army, he has to go down into the valley. Ultimately, what helps them? God brings this flood, this enormous rain that gushes, and then the chariots become a disadvantage because the wheels get stuck in the mud. So we're seeing already throughout the book of Judges, we're seeing this difference between the type of battle that an Israelite can fight and the type of battle that some of these other nations can fight. So the kind of issues that they've had until now, though, are just multiplying exponentially when we talk about the much more advanced level militarily and quantitatively of the Philistines, which are spread out all over, and they have so many sophisticated systems. So, and that also helps us to understand how it is that Samson is so different, because Samson, unlike the others, there's no army here. He's not raising an army. He also seems to be acting on his own. I mean, we know that God set him aside, but we see nowhere does he get appointed, or is he a leader in any way of the nation, not even of the tribe of Dan or the tribe of Judah, which he is so close to. Who is he and what's he doing? And we've also asked questions about, the morality of what he was doing. Is he is he just like a tough guy, kind of like a bully? What is his point? What is he trying to do? And, keeping in mind that the Israelites are at such a disadvantage, I think one way of looking at Samson is to say he is going to see how he can weaken the Philistines. He's not going to be able to defeat them, but he will bother them. He will conduct guerrilla warfare. He will try to strike here and there using his immense physical strength, but at the end of the day, he's only one man. He's not going to defeat them. But there will be two purposes in what he's doing. Number one, to strike a blow at the Philistines for the sake of striking a blow at the Philistines. But the second goal will be to give the nation of Israel a different model. Because right now, the nation of Israel is a mess. They are totally submitted to the Philistines, and they have no confidence whatsoever in their ability to do anything to withstand the Philistines. So given that context, now let's go into the next story, okay? So we're starting with chapter 15, verse 9. So the Philistines go up. I am not reading in the English because I brought to Eilat only my Hebrew Bible. So you are now going to be treated to the Sondra Baras, more or less, translation of the Bible, because I'm reading it in Hebrew. Okay, so the Philistines go up, okay, and they camp in Judah, okay, and they go to this place called Lehi. Now, Lehi is very interesting because Lehi is the name of a place, but it also means the cheekbone. The actual word means a cheekbone, okay, and that's going to be something that we're going to see show up afterwards, okay. And so it says here now, the people of Judah turned to the Philistines and said, why have you come up to us? Now, remember the geography. The Philistines came in from the west, and they're mostly in the western plain. Judah is in the mountains. It's further east. So you have this idea of the Philistines coming up towards the mountains, Judah coming down and say, why are you coming up to us? Why are you about to climb the mountain? What have we done to bother you? You know, like, leave us alone. And they say, we have come to capture Samson. Okay, we want to do to him what he has done to us. Now, remember, he has just, after this whole thing, and they burnt, they burnt the family and this whole terrible thing. And of course, Samson is just, taken, he's destroyed their fields. He's destroyed so many of them, so they want to take revenge. So it says here, so 3,000 men from Judah go down to this particular place called Sela Etam, and that's where Samson is. And they come to Samson with a complaint. Now, this reminds me tremendously of the situation of the elders of Israel in Egypt, right after Moses comes to Pharaoh. And he said, and they start their first thing, let my people go. And of course, Pharaoh is very angry. And the first response that Pharaoh has is to make the situation of the Israelite slaves in Egypt much worse than before. And he ups the quotas of how much they have to produce, and they're suffering terribly under this terrible burden. And so what happens? The nation of Israel, then the children of Israel who are slaves in Egypt, who do they complain about? They don't complain to Pharaoh. They complain to Moses. They say, what did we need this for? Leave us alone. Okay, we're not in a good situation. We're in slavery, but you have just made it worse. And that's exactly the same thing that Judah is now saying to the Philistines, which means Judah is in a slave mentality. Instead of saying, wow, good for Samson, he knocked it to our enemy, we got to cooperate with him and see if we can figure out what's going on. No, they are completely, they just, are so put down. They are so, in a slave mentality that they want to cooperate with the Philistines, and they're upset with Samson. So they said to him, what have you done to us? And Samson answered, I just want to do to them what they've done to you. Okay. I'm doing to them what they have done to me. Okay. And so they said, well, we came down now to take you prisoner because we want to hand you over to the Philistines, because if we give you to the Philistines, they'll leave us alone. Land for peace. Feed the bully. You feed the bully and you think you're going to make him go away. But it's very clear, the more you feed the bully, the more the bully comes back. But Samson here demonstrates amazing leadership. Now, clearly, we can see from this situation that the Judah people have never asked him to be their leader. They have never asked him to fight their fight with the Philistines. If anything, they're against. It's very much here a situation like a Moses, was sent by God, and the elders said, get out of here. And it's similar here. Samson is sent by God, but the people don't want him. Okay, so, but here Samson says, look, he says, yes, tie me up, take me to them, just don't hurt me. Because Samson is confident that he's going to get out of this, and that's exactly what happened. So they take him up, in verse 14, they come up to the same place called Lehi, which is where the Philistines are. And the Philistines were so excited, they came down because they said, he's ours, our captain. And then what do we have here at the end of verse 14? Right then, the Spirit of God envelops Samson. So we have a sense here that we're going to have a miracle. We're going to see that Samson is going to show an incredible show of strength, and he's going to be able to get out of this, but it's all part of the Spirit of God. This is all still part of a good thing. It's part of fulfilling his divine mission, okay? And so he's able to get out of the binds, okay? And what does he do? He finds a cheekbone of a donkey, and it's exactly the same word. Okay, Lehi is the place. Lehi is the cheekbone of the donkey. He finds a dead donkey, and he takes this bone, in his hand, and he strikes. He kills 1,000 people with this one bone, and it's amazing. He doesn't have this, submachine gun, one bone, one club, whatever, and he kills 1,000 people. Okay, and then what does he say in verse 16? It's really nice, because here what Samson says, it's very poetic. It's kind of like a victory song that he says here. He says, with the cheek, or with, the cheekbone of the donkey. And then in Hebrew it says chamor, chamorotayim. It's the word chamor is the donkey. And it's literally as if this, he says, donkey, more donkeys, the donkey and the chick of the donkey and donkeys. But it reminds us very much of a verse in Exodus. And again, we're going back to Moses and Exodus. Okay, there's an expression in Exodus with the frogs. Okay, so at the point at which, this is Exodus 7, chapter 7, verse 10. Okay, and we have this. The frogs are everywhere. It's the plague of the frogs. And then it says in verse 10 that they were accumulated, and the word in Hebrew is chamarim, which is very similar. It's that same word that's similar to the word donkey, chamor. Okay, what it means in this context is piles. There were piles of frogs. Okay, and how it was actually dead frogs, piles of dead frogs, and they rotted throughout the land. Okay, so here, one of the interpretations, that this is a use of the same word. He's doing a play on words here. He's doing a play on words of the donkey, but what he's talking about is piles of dead people. Okay, but he uses this donkey imagery, piles of dead people with the cheekbone of a donkey. Okay, I struck 1,000 people. So he is singing a victory song. Is he singing yay me? Or is he saying, wow, look at this wonderful thing that happened, as kind of like a recognition that this is supernatural, that this is God. He doesn't mention God, but this I leave as a question mark. Is he saying, yay me? Or is he saying, wow, in this kind of thing? So I'm not sure. Okay, but one of the things I think we see in this whole story is that he doesn't fight against Judah. He could have easily said to Judah, he could have killed 1,000 Judeans who came to hand them over to the Philistines. But no, he sees himself as a messenger. He sees himself as a leader of looking out for the people. And so he understands the fear of the Judeans. He works with them in order to get himself to the Philistines, to keep them out of the problem. And yet then he will strike the Philistines. And there is perhaps a message here, and part of what his victory song was all about. You see, Judeans, I struck and killed 1,000 people. Do not be afraid. Do not act like a slave. We can do this. Okay, and I think that's a very positive and important way to see this whole thing. Anyway, when he finishes, he throws down the bone and he calls the place Lehi Heights, Ramat Lehi, like Lehi Heights. Okay, now we already know that the name is Lehi because that's what it tells us at the beginning of the story. That's where they were. So you wonder, and this you have a lot of times, does he come to a place that's called Lehi and just add an additional layer of meaning because he used this cheekbone of a donkey? Or was it really Samson who gave the name to the place, but we already used that name, beforehand because that's the name of the place. So that's a question that we see on a number of different occasions. Doesn't make that big of a difference, but it's just worth talking about. Anyway, while he's there, he's finished with all this and he gets very, very thirsty. And he crawls out to God and he says, you have given, me, your servant, this enormous salvation. And now I am going to die of thirst. And then I will fall in the hands of the Philistines. And at which point God does this miracle and he has water coming out of a rock. Remind you of Moses? Very much so, water coming out of the rock. So I think there's a lot of parallels going on here on purpose where we're basically getting this idea. Samson is a Moses. He's in an amazing position. He's been giving these powers. It acts totally differently, a different situation, but there are elements here that are reminding us of a Moses, okay? And he drank and it was restored, okay? And therefore he called that place Anarchy-Episode. Okay, so basically he gives the name to that particular spring. He calls it the spring of Koreh, which is the spring of calling out. The spring where he called out to God, which is in that place called Lehi. And then we have an ending, and he judged the nation of Israel for 20 years. Okay, if you will look ahead to the very end of chapter 16, you will see that again, we have an ending, and that is the real ending of the story of Samson. And he judged Israel for 20 years. Okay, it's the same 20 years. So basically, we're going to now have chapter 16 that's going to give us a whole continuation of Samson and the rest of his story. And yet, in the middle of the story, before the story ends, we have this summary at the end of chapter 15 that he judged Israel for 20 years. And I think what's happening here is there's a kind of a dividing line, okay? And we will see exactly how this, until here, we are able to see elements in Samson's personality that are very positive. And at the same time, we are seeing elements in Samson's personality that are his weaknesses and that will ultimately bring him to his downfall. But we end here with a kind of summary. He ruled Israel for 20 years. If he had just kept up the way he had done now, it would have been a beautiful ending. We were just said wonderful escapades, wonderful miracles. Look what we have done. And he ruled the Israel for 20 years. But instead, we go on to the rest of the story. It's the same 20 years, but we have this, suddenly we have a sense of, oh my goodness. And what we see as Samson moves on, we see that more and more his weaknesses, and his main weakness, his weakness for women. And that weakness is going to be his downfall. So let's get started. We will end up finishing this next week because we don't have that much time, but let's get started. Okay, so the next story, Samson goes to Gaza and he sees there a prostitute and he comes to her. What's the point? The first wife, we knew there was a point. He wants to marry a Philistine so that he can, become part of Philistine society. He can kind of penetrate their society. Why does he need to go to prostitute? He just comes to her. He just wants her. He is just, taking advantage of her. What is going on here? Now, of course, in the end, he will also use this to his advantage. But already you get this feeling like, a prostitute? What's that? What's that all about? Okay, well, the Gazans heard that Samson had come, and they decided to ambush him at night. So they waited for him all night near the city gates, and they were going to wait until he came out, and then they were going to kill him. Okay, figures he's coming out. He had a night with his prostitute. He's not thinking clearly. He's walking around. He's feeling good. So we'll ambush him, and we'll kill him. Okay, but what happens instead? He says, Samson, of course, did not sleep all night. He gets up in the middle of the night, Okay, he gets up and he literally lifts up the gates of the city and takes them with him all the way to Judah. He goes, and here again, remember the geography. He's going to go up to the head of the mountain, which is right opposite Hebron. It's exactly what we were seeing. If he goes to the edge of Dan, we're at Judah, then we start climbing the mountain. Where you get to, if you climb the mountain, you get to Hebron. Okay, so that's where he's going. That's the end of the story. What's this all about? Okay, so I think, first of all, again, we're talking about a prostitute. We're beginning to see Samson's going after these women aren't so good. Did he kill any Philistines here? No. But the only thing he did do was show that he was a big, strong guy. And he takes the gates of the city to Hebron. You have to believe that this is going to make an impression on the Judans. Okay, the next story should be, and the Judans decide to make Samson their captain, and they realize Samson is an amazing hero and he has amazing prowess. Let's all work together and see if we can defeat the Philistines. That would be the normal next step if we were talking about picking up the gate of the city and taking it to Hebron. But instead, the next story really connects us better with he went to Gaza and he laid with a prostitute. Okay, and it almost as if this story gives us two elements, two possibilities. Samson is a guy who likes women. Samson is an amazingly strong guy who was able to raise the spirits and confidence of the nation of Israel. And this story in the middle here has both elements. Which one is the one that Samson is going to follow? And unfortunately, what we see in the next story, which is, of course, the story with Delilah, is going to be the wrong one. He goes with a woman, he finds Delilah, and he's not marrying her. There's no seeking. It's not like the first. He's not a prostitute. She's not looking for a one-night stand. She's not a woman that he wants to marry in order to become part of his Philistine society. He says, and after this, he fell in love with a woman in Nahal Sorek, and her name is Delilah. Okay? He hasn't married her. He's with her. He's in love with her. We have a sense here that he has just been swayed by his heart. He is just, these women, they keep pulling him. They keep pulling him. And what's going on here? And of course, what happens is that the Philistine sees that she has influence over him. And so they go to her and they pay her money. They offer her money. They says, we're going to give you 1,100 pieces of silver. That's an enormous amount of money. We're going to give you that kind of money if she succeeds in bringing Samson to them. Now, she tries a number of times. She keeps saying to him, what's your secret? What's your secret? Right? And every time he tells her a different story. But what you don't see Samson doing is getting up and saying, something's going on here. When he was with the wife previously, and there was this whole thing about the riddle, and also there you had the Philistines that are pressuring her to give the riddle, and there they pressured her. Okay, she wasn't, this was a different situation than Delilah. They threaten her, and that's how she gets him to talk. But as soon as all of this happened, and they have the answer to the riddle, he realizes right away what had happened and that they had gotten to his wife. Here, from the very first moment when she's pleading with him, it's obvious that someone's gotten to her. What does it matter to her? What does she care? And she keeps, going after him. And what happens at the end? Let me see where it is. Verse 16. She was so oppressive. She was bothering him so much, pleading that he wanted to die. What does it mean he wanted to die? He could have just gotten up and left. He could have said, Delilah, you're making me crazy. I'm out of here. And this is where we see his weakness. He cannot say no to a woman. He cannot overcome his urges, his emotions, his falling in love. There is no way, if he had his eyes open, he's not stupid, he would understand that this is not good. And yet he is blind. He's incapable of seeing that, or more likely, he is incapable of withstanding this weak point of his. Women. He has women bring him down. We will stop here because we've run out of time. We will continue next week with the Delilah story, and ultimately we will complete our study of Samson. This is a time, if anybody has any questions, open your mics. Let me know what you'd like to say.
Two things, Sondra. One, in the beginning, the story of Samson, it said, God, the angel, hello?
Yes, I'm hearing.
Yeah, the angel said that he is going to begin to help the Israelites. He wasn't to finish the job, really. And the other thing is that even in our weaknesses, God can still use us, because he still helped the Jewish people in spite of all of his weaknesses.
Yes, and what I want to do next week is discuss this issue. To take a critical look at Samson, okay? Is he someone who, like you say, God saw from the beginning that he would have this flaw, but use it? Or was it more that, and that's part of it, I do believe that's part of it, or is there a point at which Samson fails in his mission? Okay, maybe he redeems himself afterwards, but he fails. I think we need to, because Samson is not a usual story. Every other story, God chooses somebody, he has a specific mission, he fulfills his mission, okay? And now we saw with Jephthah fulfilled his mission, but then afterwards he ends up with that civil war. So he clearly, he fulfills his mission, he's a leader, whatever. Here he went very, very wrong, okay? Samson is a completely different kind of character, because from the beginning, he has this very, weakness, a real flaw. And how does that work? And that's what I'd like to discuss more deeply next week. G, did you have your hand up? And Lynn also, let's start with G. Yeah.
Okay, Sondra, thank you so much for every time that you offer some unique insights, which I do appreciate a lot. Now, I found your last remark on Samson rather harsh. Now, which one of you, I assume most of you are wives, which of you would prefer to act otherwise?
What do you mean? I don't understand.
I mean, which one would you expect your believing husband to behave different from Samson did?
What I expect of Samson, you're asking?
Oh, that's right. I mean, do you understand my question?
I'm not sure. Like, you saying that Samson was...
I said, I found your last remark on Samson rather harsh. Yeah, that's my remark on your remark. Now, my question is, which one of you, as a wife who has a believing husband, which one of you would prefer your husband to act unlike Samson?
Why would we want a husband? Okay, first of all, Samson acts against his own best interest because he is preyed upon by these women in two cases. But also first case, except that he gets out of it. The second case, he doesn't get out of it. So I'm not sure that this, in other words, had he been able to go into these situations and come out with his hand, with the upper hand, maybe, but that's not what happens, because this, look at Delilah especially, but the first wife as well, by pleading with him, by nagging him.
Okay, so in your view, then, obviously you are one of your people, which I'm not. Is this assessment of yours consonant with your race?
I don't understand.
Well, I think I'm asking a very clear question. Sondra?
I don't understand what you're asking. Are you saying
All right,
that
okay.
Samson,
Well, then you can,
until
perhaps
the
you can
end?
try to answer other questions. I put my hand down. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. If anyone has a comment based on G's question, I would love to hear it. I don't know if I'm quite understanding the question. Why don't you make a comment?
Sometimes acting as a speaker is quite tiring, and a question can be distracting. No, I understand that. No worries.
Well, thank you first. Just to say, I always enjoy the teaching. And secondly, I didn't understand the question either. But my comment was going to be, I'm jumping ahead to Judges 16, verse 31. And his brothers and all his father's household came down and took him and brought him up. And to me, despite all, one of the ladies, Claudette, mentioned that in Judges 13, verse 5, it says that Samson would begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And that was said to his parents. And presumably, we noticed that he then had more brothers. This was their first child. He had more brothers. But I think it's marvelous how God keeps his promise to the parents despite what Samson did. I think that's one of the wonders of this story, how God is able to keep his word despite us.
Well, I think, yes, and there's no question. Well, I'd like to also discuss, we'll do this next week, exactly what happens at the end of, in chapter 16. But I think that in verse 31, when it talks about his brothers and all the house of his father, it may be his physical brothers, but it may be, and I read it, to be his clan, okay, from the house of his father, meaning more, from the tribe of Dan, from the clan that was there in Beit Shemesh. Now, it could also include his real brothers, his parents' brothers. That's very possible. It's very possible he has brothers, but I look at it as broader than that, because it takes him back. They're burying him between Sarah and Eshtaol, exactly the same place where he starts, exactly the same place where God first, puts his spirit over that entire area as Samson is growing in his role. And so I see that as applying to the whole clan more than just, if he has a couple brothers. But yes, is something that is fulfilled there, and that we will definitely take up next week. Anyone else have a comment? Okay, so that's it for today then. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And we will take this up again next week.
Yeah,
we look forward to it.
I hope you enjoyed that film. And we have lots more film content and emails and articles that I'm sure you will enjoy as well. Check out our website at CFOIC.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You can do that right from the homepage. I know you will really enjoy the content that will land in your inbox on a regular basis. Hope to see you soon.